Linda married Scott on the day I had been saving for our anniversary. The church bells rang in the same city where I had spent years fighting for her love, against distance, against her doubts, against every whisper that told me she was slipping away. While I stood outside the gates with a box in my hands, they opened the doors for her in a gown I had once promised to buy. Scott was by her side, holding her hand like I never existed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. 3 years ago, I had stood in the rain outside her apartment, waiting for her to open the door after we'd fought. I had flowers in one hand, the resignation letter from my job in the other. I quit that job so I could take one closer to her, thinking time together was worth more than a salary. She had opened the door with red eyes and no makeup, then fallen into my arms like she was home. I thought that moment meant forever. I didn't realize forever was something she could give to someone else. As Scott helped her into the waiting car, her veil brushed against the wind, catching a glint of the diamond necklace I recognized instantly. I had seen it months before in a catalog, circled by her pen, and ordered it without telling her. It had been hidden in the bottom of my wardrobe for our anniversary, wrapped in gold paper. Now it sat around her neck like a trophy he had won. The crowd's applause swelled. People spoke of how perfect they looked, how their story was meant to be. I wondered how many of them knew I had been the one paying her rent the year she lost her job. How many remembered I had stood by her hospital bed when she broke her ankle, missing my sister's wedding to stay by her side. When I finally turned away from the church, the weight in my chest made breathing difficult. My phone buzzed. Nancy. She'd been my friend since college, and she knew enough about my history with Linda to understand why I wasn't answering calls today. I ignored it and kept walking until I found myself at the park where Linda and I had first talked about marriage. The bench was still there, damp from the morning rain. I sat down and unwrapped the box I had been carrying. Inside was the anniversary gift I had never delivered, a framed photograph from our trip to the coast, the day she told me she couldn't imagine life without me. My hands trembled as I set it down on the bench beside me. A shadow fell across the photo. I looked up to see Nancy, breathless from running. "Steve," she said softly, her eyes darting to the frame, then back to my face. "You shouldn't be here." "Where should I be?" I asked, my voice hollow. "At the reception, raising a toast to the woman who replaced me?" Nancy's eyes softened, but there was something else there, something she wasn't saying. "You don't know everything," she murmured. "I know enough," I replied, standing. The bench creaked under the shift of weight. She chose him. On the day she promised it would be ours. As I started to walk away, Nancy called after me. "If you leave now, you'll never hear the truth." I stopped but didn't turn around. The truth had stopped mattering the moment Linda smiled at Scott in front of that crowd. My fight was over, and I had lost, not in one decisive blow, but through 1,000 small cuts she'd given me over the years. Today was simply the final one. I am Steve, 32 years old, and for nearly a decade my life revolved around Linda. Ours was not a love born in a quiet, predictable way. It was forged in late-night train rides, under flickering street lamps, during moments when the world seemed determined to pull us apart. I met her when I was 23, standing in line at a food stall during a university reunion. She was there with Nancy, her best friend since high school. I remember thinking she had the kind of presence that made the background blur, like she was the only point of focus in a crowded frame. Linda was 2 years younger than me, still in her final year of business school. She had ambition in her eyes, the kind that burned like a lighthouse in the dark. I was working my first job in marketing, still unsure if my path was steady or if I was simply treading water. That night, she spilled coffee on my sleeve and laughed instead of apologizing. I should have been annoyed, but her laugh had a way of softening everything. We started talking, and soon we were inseparable. She would tell me her dreams in pieces, wanting to start her own fashion label, wanting to travel, wanting to prove to her family she could succeed without their help. I told her my own goals in a much quieter tone, afraid they might sound too small beside hers. I wanted stability, a home that didn't feel temporary, someone to come home to every night without the fear they might leave. From the very beginning, Linda tested the limits of my patience and my devotion. Not in cruel ways at first, more like she was used to being chased, to seeing how far someone would go to hold on. She had an orbit, and people naturally revolved around her. Nancy once warned me in a half-joking tone, "If you love her, be ready to fight for her. Linda isn't the type to make it easy." I laughed then, not realizing how prophetic that statement would become. Our relationship was a series of small battles against time, distance, and other people's opinions. Linda's career ambitions often came first, and I adapted. When she wanted to intern abroad for 6 months, I encouraged her, even though it meant long-distance calls at odd hours and missing her on my birthday. When she lost that internship unexpectedly, I was the one who stayed up all night researching other opportunities, sending her links until she found something else to keep her moving forward. Scott entered our lives much later, though I'd heard his name long before I met him. He was a friend from Linda's university days, a man she often described as reliable, like a big brother. It wasn't unusual for her to mention him, sometimes in passing, sometimes with a laugh when recalling something he said years ago. The first time I met him in person was at one of Nancy's parties. He was taller than me, confident in a way that didn't demand attention, but still commanded it. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm, and his smile was just polite enough to be unreadable. Nancy remained a constant presence throughout our years together. She was the bridge between my world and Linda's, often the one to mediate when Linda and I clashed. She understood Linda's stubbornness and my quiet persistence, sometimes siding with one, sometimes with the other. Over time, she became someone I trusted in her own right, though her loyalty was always first and foremost to Linda. Linda and I had our first serious fight in our second year together. She had forgotten a dinner with my family because she went to a last-minute industry event. I was angry, not because she missed the dinner, but because she hadn't called to let me know. She dismissed my frustration as overreacting, saying I needed to be more understanding of her career. That night, I realized something important. Loving Linda would always mean bending more than I wanted to, forgiving faster than I felt ready, and putting my own needs aside when hers demanded priority. And yet, I stayed. I stayed when she took a job that kept her in another city for almost a year, visiting only when her schedule allowed. I stayed when she missed anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays, often with apologies sent through hurried texts. I stayed when whispers reached me about how close she was to Scott, how they were seen having lunch together more often than colleagues usually did. Linda had a way of making me believe every sacrifice was worth it. She would come back from her trips and curl up next to me like no time had passed, asking about my day with genuine interest. She remembered small details, how I took my coffee, the fact that I hated crowded malls, the exact brand of pen I liked for sketching. Those details made me think she cared in a way no one else ever had. My friends often asked why I put up with the instability, the uncertainty. I told them it was because I believed in what we had, because I had seen glimpses of a future where her ambitions and my steadiness could coexist. I wasn't naive, I knew relationships took work, and I was willing to work harder than most. But there were cracks, and they widened over time. Linda grew more secretive about certain parts of her life, especially when Scott was involved. When I asked about it, she would get defensive, accusing me of being insecure. Sometimes I wondered if she was right. Nancy noticed the strain, but rarely intervened unless things were on the brink of collapse. Once, during a quiet evening when Linda was away, Nancy told me, "You're good for her, Steve, but I don't know if she's ready to be good for you." I didn't ask what she meant. Some truths were better left unspoken. Our last year together was the hardest. Linda's career finally took off, but so did the distance between us. I tried to keep up, attending her events, smiling through conversations with people who seemed to know more about her day-to-day life than I did. Scott was there more often, sometimes in the background, sometimes not. I told myself it was harmless, that she would never cross that line. The anniversary we never got to celebrate was supposed to be my moment to show her I still believed in us. I had planned every detail, a dinner at the rooftop where we had our first date, the necklace she had admired months ago, even a weekend trip to the coast. I didn't know she had other plans entirely. The day itself began like any other. I worked through the morning, sent her a message about dinner, and got a brief reply. "We'll see." Hours later, I stood in front of a church, holding the wrapped necklace, watching her walk out in a wedding gown, on my anniversary, but not with me. Scott's hand was on her waist, steady and certain, as if it had always been his place. I didn't move, I didn't shout or demand answers, I just watched as she stepped into the car, as the crowd cheered, as the life I had built around her crumbled without ceremony. Nancy found me later, her eyes full of something between pity and guilt. She told me there were things I didn't understand, that I needed to hear her side, but at that moment, hearing Linda's side felt meaningless. My fight was over, and I had lost. I am Steve. I fought for Linda through every obstacle: family disapproval, long distance, career demands, rumors, my own doubts. I fought because I believed she was worth it. Now I'm left with the bitter truth. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, the person you love will give their future to someone else. The first fracture in what I thought was an unshakable foundation came quietly. No arguments, no slammed doors, just a gap that widened without my permission. It was late autumn, the kind of evening when the air is cool enough to make you want to stay inside. I had wrapped up work early and stopped by the market to pick up ingredients for Linda's favorite mushroom risotto. She had mentioned a stressful week ahead, so I thought a warm meal would ease her mind. When I reached our apartment, the lights were off, no shoes by the door, no jacket on the rack. I set the groceries on the counter and tried calling her. No answer. By the time the risotto was ready, the clock read 10:47 p.m. My calls had gone unanswered. I sat alone at the table, the steam from the food curling upward until it faded into the air. Finally, my phone buzzed, a message from Nancy. "She's still out, don't wait up." My chest tightened. Linda had never asked Nancy to be the messenger before. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, but there was something about the wording, the vagueness, that didn't sit right. When Linda returned near midnight, she was in a fitted dress I hadn't seen before, her hair styled in soft waves. She smelled faintly of champagne. "Why are you still up?" she asked, almost surprised. "I made dinner," I said. She glanced at the table where the risotto sat untouched. "Oh, I already ate. Scott invited me to a networking thing, and there was food." I wanted to ask why she hadn't called, why she thought letting Nancy speak for her was enough, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and began clearing the plates I'd set out earlier. Linda watched me for a moment, then went to change. That night, I told myself it was just a lapse in communication. People forget. People get busy. But the lapses kept coming. Over the next few months, there were more events she attended without telling me, dinners, openings, gatherings where Scott's name appeared more often than anyone else's. When I asked, she would assure me it was work-related or just old friends catching up. "You're reading too much into it, Steve," she would say, brushing off my concern with a smile. The real breaking point began 2 weeks before our anniversary. I had been working late on a pitch when Nancy called. Her tone was hesitant, almost guarded. "Steve, I'm not sure if you know, but Linda's been spending a lot of time at Scott's place. She says it's for work, he's helping her with a project, but it's a lot." I gripped the phone tighter. "How a lot?" "Almost every other night," Nancy admitted. "I just thought you should know." That night, Linda came home later than usual, carrying a bag of documents. She looked tired, but there was a certain brightness in her eyes, like she'd accomplished something important. I wanted to ask her about Scott, about Nancy's words, but I knew if I came at it directly, she would get defensive, so I simply asked how her day was. She hesitated before answering. "Productive. Scott had some contacts who might be interested in my designs. He's been helping me make introductions." I forced a smile. "That's nice of him." Linda didn't notice the pause. She was already moving on to talk about the designs, the meetings, the possibilities. It wasn't that I didn't want her to succeed, I had always wanted that for her, but hearing Scott's name woven into every thread of her recent progress twisted something in me. The week of our anniversary, I planned everything in secret. I booked the rooftop restaurant where we'd had our first date, arranged for the chef to prepare a custom menu, and wrapped the necklace she had once admired in a small velvet box. I wanted to remind her of where we started, to show her that no matter the strain, I still believed in us. The day before, Linda mentioned she might have something to do in the evening. I told her I had made plans, hoping she would adjust. She smiled vaguely and said, "We'll see." On the day itself, I got off work early to set things up. I texted her at 4 p.m., dinner at 7. "Can you make it?" No reply. At 6:30, I was standing by the rooftop entrance with the box in my pocket. At 7, the waiter informed me my reservation was ready. At 7:45, she still hadn't shown. At 8:03, my phone buzzed, not from her, but from Scott's social media feed. There she was, in a soft gold dress, smiling at him under warm lights, holding a bouquet of roses. The caption read, "Some bonds never fade." It took me a full minute to realize I was gripping my phone so hard my hand ached. I clicked the like button out of some bitter instinct, as though acknowledging the blow would make it hurt less. At 8:15, Linda finally called. Her voice was light, almost casual. "Don't be mad, it was Scott's launch party, and he insisted I come. Next year, I promise, our anniversary will be just us." The laugh that escaped me was humorless. "No need, Linda, you won't have to anymore." She went quiet, but I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call and left. The restaurant, the necklace still heavy in my pocket. The following days blurred together. Linda tried to act as though nothing had changed, making small talk in the mornings, asking if I wanted coffee. I responded politely, but kept my distance. I wasn't ready to confront her outright, not yet. Nancy visited one evening when Linda was out. She stood in the doorway with a hesitant look. "Steve, she doesn't understand what she's doing to you. She thinks you'll always be there, no matter what." I leaned against the counter, the words bitter in my mouth. "Maybe that's the problem." "She's not a bad person," Nancy said quietly, "but she's careless, and Scott, he's not just a friend anymore, not the way she talks about him when you're not around." I felt something inside me settle, not in acceptance, but in clarity. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a choice. Linda had been making it for months, maybe years, and I had been too blinded by my commitment to see it. The night before she left for what she claimed was a business trip, Linda asked if I could water her plants while she was away. I agreed, saying nothing about the fact that I already knew where she was going. Scott had posted a cryptic update earlier, 2 tickets to a coastal resort, tagged with no names but accompanied by a photo of the ocean. When she returned, tanned and smiling, I didn't ask about the trip. I didn't need to. The lines around her eyes told me she had laughed more in those days than she had in months with me. The emotional dilemma wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about the person I had become in the process of holding on to her. I was no longer the man who had met her at that food stall, full of hope and unshaken belief. I was someone who measured my words to avoid arguments, who accepted half-truths to keep the peace, who celebrated small scraps of attention as if they were proof of love. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the fight I thought I had been winning all these years was already lost. Not because I hadn't given enough, but because Linda had stopped choosing me long before she married Scott. The next morning, I packed the necklace into a drawer and left the apartment early. As I stepped outside, the cold air felt sharper than usual. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the first breath I had taken in months that didn't taste like compromise. The days after our anniversary felt like walking through a fog that refused to lift. I could see fragments of my life, work emails, grocery lists, my morning run, but none of it seemed connected to the man I used to be. Everything was dulled, muted, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. Linda moved through our shared space like nothing had happened, humming while she made coffee, scrolling on her phone at the table, occasionally tossing out casual questions about my day. I answered in short, polite phrases, the way strangers do when forced to share an elevator. Inside, though, I was far from polite. There was a knot in my chest that seemed to tighten every time her phone buzzed. Sometimes it was Nancy, other times it was a name I didn't recognize, but far too often I would catch the glow of Scott's name flashing across the screen before she flipped it face down. She never left her phone unattended anymore. At night, lying in bed, I would hear her fingers tapping quickly against the glass, the faint sound of an incoming voice note, her low laugh in reply. I would close my eyes and tell myself to sleep, to block it out, but the images came anyway, her at that launch party, her hand resting lightly on Scott's arm, the way she leaned toward him in the photos as though drawn by gravity. The part that ate at me most wasn't just that she had gone to him, it was that she came back to me without a flicker of shame. She seemed to believe my love was a constant she could rely on, a river that would keep flowing no matter how many stones she threw into it. That assumption burned hotter than jealousy. One evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the first time in months. She glanced up with a bright smile. "I thought I'd make your favorite stir-fry tonight." I hesitated in the doorway. "Why?" She laughed lightly. "Why not? I feel like we haven't had dinner together in forever." The truth was, we hadn't. But the sudden shift in her behavior felt calculated, like she was trying to steer me back into the role of the patient, forgiving boyfriend, no, husband, she'd always known me to be. I sat at the table and watched her move around the kitchen, my mind a tangle of suspicion and longing. Part of me wanted to believe this was a peace offering. Another part wondered if Scott had cancelled on her that night, leaving her free to play the part of the attentive partner. When she set the plate in front of me, I thanked her quietly. We ate mostly in silence, the clink of chopsticks against porcelain louder than our conversation. Every so often, she would glance at me, as if trying to gauge whether her efforts were working. Later that week, Nancy called. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Steve, I know things are tense right now, but I think Linda's starting to realize she's gone too far." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that supposed to comfort me?" "I'm not saying it fixes anything," Nancy admitted, "but I've known her a long time. When she starts trying this hard, it's because she's scared. She knows she's losing something." That night, Linda suggested we go for a walk after dinner. The streets were quiet, the air cool. She slipped her hand into mine, and for a moment, muscle memory took over. My fingers closed around hers. It was easy to forget, in that fleeting warmth, the months of late nights and unexplained absences. Easy, but dangerous. Halfway down the block, she said softly, "You've been distant." I didn't answer. "I know I've made mistakes," she continued, "but we've been through so much, Steve. Don't you think we can get past this?" I stopped walking, turning to face her. "Can we, or do you mean you think I can?" Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm the one who's always had to get past things," I said quietly. "The missed birthdays, the unanswered calls, the nights you spent with him instead of me. You act like forgiveness is just part of the deal." For a moment, I saw the mask slip. Her eyes hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line, but then, just as quickly, she softened again. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been selfish. I'll do better." The words sounded rehearsed, like an actor delivering lines she didn't quite believe. The next few days brought more of the same, small gestures, polite conversation, invitations to dinner or coffee. I kept my responses neutral, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of thinking I had forgotten. At the same time, I couldn't stop the flicker of hope that maybe, somehow, she was telling the truth. But that hope was poisoned by the constant undercurrent of doubt. One Saturday, she suggested we go to the farmer's market together. I agreed, thinking it might be harmless. As we browsed the stalls, I caught sight of a tall figure in the crowd. Scott. He was standing by a coffee cart, scrolling through his phone. Linda spotted him too, and in that instant, I watched her expression change. Her eyes lit up, her posture shifted, a faint smile tugged at her lips. She didn't approach him, but she lingered in that stall far longer than necessary, glancing over every few seconds. When Scott finally noticed her, he smiled and raised his hand in a small wave. She waved back, the gesture so casual it could almost be innocent. Almost. We left the market with bags of produce and unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Back at the apartment, I set the groceries down and said, "You don't even try to hide it." Her head snapped up. "Hide what?" "That you still light up every time you see him." She laughed, but it was forced. "You're imagining things." I walked past her without answering, closing the bedroom door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the familiar weight settle in my chest. This wasn't jealousy, it was recognition, the acknowledgement that I was no longer the center of her orbit, that maybe I hadn't been for a long time. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, listening to her breathing beside me, wondering if her dreams were of us or of him. Every small movement she made felt amplified in the dark. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, she turned away from me to check it. I didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. The suspense of not knowing the full truth was its own kind of torture. Did I want to catch her in a lie, or would that only confirm what I already feared? Part of me craved certainty, even if it meant pain. Another part wanted to live in the gray space, where I could still pretend ignorance was protection. Linda's attempts to fix things became more frequent, making breakfast, suggesting weekend trips, sending me random midday texts asking how I was, but each gesture felt like a bandage over a wound that was still bleeding underneath. I began to realize the emotional struggle wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about the part of me that was tempted to accept the performance, to fall back into the comfort of routine, even knowing it was hollow. Nancy called again one afternoon, her tone urgent. Steve, I think she's going to make a big move. She mentioned wanting to take time off work to focus on you two. I stared at the wall. Why does it sound like she's negotiating a contract instead of talking about our marriage? Nancy sighed. I'm telling you because I know you're not ready to hear it from her. But she's scared. I've never seen her this way. Fear. The word lingered in my mind that night. Not my fear, hers. Fear of losing me, or fear of losing the stability I provided. Fear of missing me, or fear of the silence that would take my place. The emotional weight pressed harder with each passing day. I was torn between two equally unbearable choices, to leave and accept the loss, or to stay and live in constant suspicion. Every time I looked at her, I saw both the woman I had fought for and the woman who had walked into another man's arms on our anniversary. Both existed in the same space, wearing the same face, speaking in the same voice. That duality was the cruelest part, knowing that love and betrayal could inhabit the same person. And in the quiet moments, when she wasn't looking, I asked myself the question I had avoided for months. Was I still here because I loved her, or because I didn't know how to be without her? The turning point came on a Tuesday, as sudden and sharp as glass shattering in a quiet room. I was at work when Nancy called, her voice tight. Steve, I don't know how to say this, but you should come to the corner cafe on 5th, now. There was something in her tone, urgent but heavy with hesitation, that made me grab my coat without a second thought. The cafe was a 15-minute walk, but I covered the distance in half the time, my pulse pounding with each step. Through the window, I spotted Linda instantly. She was sitting at a corner table, her back to the glass, leaning forward in a way that pulled her closer to Scott. His hand rested casually over hers on the table. Neither of them noticed me. Linda was smiling, the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months, warm, unguarded, the kind that made her eyes soften. I didn't go inside. Instead, I stood across the street, the weight of what I was seeing pressing down harder than I expected. This wasn't just friendship, this wasn't a passing moment, this was intimacy without shame. Nancy stepped out from a side alley, spotting me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice low. I didn't know how else to make you see. I forced my eyes away from the scene. How long? A while, she admitted. But this is different. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. I left before Linda could notice me, walking aimlessly until my phone buzzed an hour later. It was Linda, asking if I wanted her to pick up dinner. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I put the phone away instead. That night, she came home carrying takeout bags, acting as though she had been on a harmless errand. I thought we could try that Thai place you like, she said brightly. I took the bags from her without a word, setting them on the counter. Who'd you have lunch with today? She froze for just a second, so quick that most people wouldn't notice, but I caught it. Nancy, she said smoothly. We were talking about her new job. The lie landed like a stone in my stomach. Funny. She told me she was too busy to meet anyone today. Linda blinked, her composure cracking for the briefest moment before she recovered. Maybe she didn't want to tell you. Or maybe you didn't want to, I said quietly. She crossed her arms, the brightness gone from her face. You've been looking for reasons to be upset with me. Is this about Scott again? You're obsessed. I didn't answer. Instead, I unpacked the food and began plating it, the silence between us louder than any argument we'd ever had. Later that night, when she thought I was asleep, I felt her slip out of bed. The faint glow of her phone lit the hallway. I listened to her muffled voice, too low to make out words, but not low enough to hide the rhythm of laughter. It was the same laugh I had heard in the cafe, softened at the edges. The next day, I made a decision. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. I left work early and drove to her office, parking in the lot across the street. At 6:15 p.m., she walked out, not alone, but with Scott at her side. They didn't touch, but the way they moved together, their steps in sync, made it feel practiced. Instead of heading toward the main road, they turned down a quieter street. I followed at a distance, my chest tightening with every step. They stopped outside a small boutique hotel. Linda glanced around before they went inside. I didn't follow them through the doors. I did. Didn't need to. For nearly an hour, I stood there, telling myself to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But when they finally emerged, her hair was slightly mussed, and there was a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. They parted ways at the corner. She got into a cab, he walked in the opposite direction. I waited until her taxi disappeared before heading home. When she returned later, I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open. She set her bag down and gave me that same bright smile she'd used when she came home with takeout. "How was your day?" I met her eyes. "Eventful. I went to see you." Her expression didn't change at first, but I saw the slight tightening at the corners of her mouth. "At my office?" "At your office. And then, elsewhere." Her breath hitched, barely audible. "You're spying on me now?" "I'm watching my wife," I corrected. "There's a difference." For the first time in months, she didn't have a ready reply. The silence stretched between us until she finally said, "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said, my voice low. "And the worst part, you don't even look sorry." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. She turned away, walking toward the bedroom without another sound. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling both vindicated and hollow. I had wanted proof, and now I had it, but proof didn't make the decision any easier. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened. She made coffee, asked if I wanted toast, even kissed me lightly on the cheek before leaving for work. It was as if she had decided that silence was safer than explanation. Nancy texted me later. "I didn't mean for it to hurt like this, but you needed to know." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Thanks." That evening, I found myself back at the park where Linda and I had first talked about a future together. The bench was the same, worn smooth by time. I sat there, trying to reconcile the woman I had loved with the one I had seen walking out of that hotel. I thought about all the times I had defended her to friends who warned me, all the times I had told myself that love was about endurance, about weathering storms. But what do you do when the storm is the person you're trying to protect? By the time I got home, she was already there, sitting on the couch with her laptop. She looked up, as if she had been waiting for me. "Steve, we need to talk." I stayed standing. "About what? How you spent your lunch break yesterday?" She flinched, her eyes narrowing. "If you've already made up your mind, what's the point?" "The point," I said, "is that this was supposed to be a marriage, not a performance." Her gaze held mine for a long moment, then dropped to the floor. "I don't know how we got here," she whispered. "But I did." We had gotten here one choice at a time, one small betrayal layered over another, until the weight was too much to carry. This was no longer just about suspicion or doubt, it was about knowing, without question, that the person I had fought for was capable of walking into someone else's life while mine was still tied to hers, and knowing that meant the fight was over. The breaking point came 3 nights later. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't provoked by anything new, at least, not in the way big confrontations usually are. It happened because the silence between us had grown so loud it was drowning out everything else. Linda came home later than usual, balancing a shopping bag on one arm and her phone in the other. She set the bag down on the coffee table, her movements deliberate, as though trying to signal that she was in control of the evening's tone. "I got us something," she said, pulling out a bottle of the red wine we'd had on our first anniversary. I stayed where I was, leaning against the kitchen doorway. "Thought you hated wine," I said. She gave me a thin smile. "I'm trying to fix things." "By pretending we're still the people we were back then?" Her smile faltered, but she forced it back into place. "Steve, I know you're angry, I know I've made mistakes, but we can't keep living like this, avoiding each other, letting everything rot." I stepped into the living room, each word tasting like metal. "Then tell me the truth." She blinked. "About what?" "About you and Scott, about the hotel, about the way you've been looking at him for months." Her fingers tightened around the stem of the wine glass she'd poured for herself. "There's nothing to tell." "Don't insult me," I said quietly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her eyes darted to the side, as if she were calculating whether the truth would be worse than the lie. "It's complicated," she finally said. No, I replied, it's not. You either crossed the line or you didn't, and I think we both know which it is. She set the glass down with a sharp clink. Fine. Yes, I've spent time with him. Yes, I've been closer than I should have been, but it's not what you think, it's not. Don't finish that sentence, I cut in. You don't get to redefine the truth so it hurts less. Her eyes flashed. And you don't get to act like you've been perfect. You've been cold, distant, judgmental. Do you know what it's like to feel like the person you come home to every night is already halfway gone? I stared at her, the absurdity of her defense almost laughable. You're telling me you betrayed me because I wasn't warm enough while you were betraying me? She flinched, but didn't back down. I needed someone who made me feel like I mattered. And you couldn't tell me that? You couldn't say, Steve, I'm unhappy without running to him first? Her jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Linda? My voice rose for the first time in months. What am I supposed to call it when my wife hides her phone, meets another man at hotels, and lies straight to my face? Her hand hovered over the wine glass again, then dropped to her side. You were so focused on holding everything together that you didn't notice it was already falling apart. Scott was there when you weren't. That was the moment the last thread snapped. I was there, Linda. I was always there. I rearranged my life for you. I moved closer to your work. I turned down promotions so we could have more too. I'm together. I gave up things that mattered to me so I could be what you needed, and you repaid that by giving the best parts of yourself to someone else. Her breath quickened, but she held my gaze. I didn't plan for it to happen. I didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said, my voice flat now. You can wrap it in excuses all you want, but you chose him. Over and over again, you chose him. On my birthday, on our anniversary, on nights when you could have been here. Something shifted in her eyes then, a crack in the armor. I thought you'd never leave, she admitted. There it was, the root of everything, not love, not even desire, just certainty that my devotion was unshakable. I took a step back, the realization settling like a stone in my gut. That's the problem, you stopped valuing me the second you decided I'd never go. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then she crossed the space between us, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. Steve, please, I'll cut him off. I'll delete his number, block him from everything. I'll prove to you that I can be the person you need. I let her take my hands, but I didn't close mine around hers. It's too late. Her eyes widened, panic rising. No, it's not. We've been through worse. This isn't about worse, I said. This is about the fact that I don't recognize you anymore. And I don't like the person I've become trying to hold on to you. Her grip tightened, nails pressing into my skin. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't walk away. Change isn't something you do because you're afraid of losing, I replied. It's something you do because you finally understand the damage you've caused, and I don't think you do. She shook her head rapidly, as if refusing to let the words sink in. I'll understand. Just give me the chance. I pulled my hands free, the air between us colder than any winter I'd known. I gave you years of chances, Linda. Her face crumpled then, tears spilling freely. I love you, she said, the words trembling. I believed she meant it in that moment, but it wasn't enough. Love without respect, without loyalty, was just a word. I walked to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I'd hidden the anniversary necklace. I set it on the coffee table between us. This was supposed to be yours, but I think it's better if you remember it as something you never got, because you never really wanted what it stood for. She stared at the box, her sobs quieting into shallow breaths. You're leaving, she whispered. Yes, I said simply. When? Soon, I've already made arrangements. Her eyes searched mine, desperation flickering like a dying flame. There's no going back from this? I shook my head. Not for me. Not anymore. The fight drained out of her then, her shoulders sagging. I never thought you'd actually. Her voice trailed off, as if finishing the sentence would make it too real. I stood there for another moment, memorizing the image of her as she was now, not the woman I'd fallen in love with, but the one who had taught me the cost of loving wit. Out boundaries. Then I turned and walked toward the door. She didn't follow me this time. Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. I breathed it in deeply, realizing it was the first breath in months that didn't feel weighed down by suspicion or disappointment. For the first time, I wasn't wondering where she was or who she was with. The realization was bittersweet. I wasn't leaving because I stopped loving her, I was leaving because I had finally learned to love myself enough to walk away. As I reached the car, my phone buzzed with a message from Nancy. "Did you talk to her?" I typed back, "Yes, it's over." She replied almost immediately. "I'm sorry, Steve, I know you tried." I stared at the screen for a long moment before putting the phone away. Tried wasn't the right word. I had fought, bled, and sacrificed, but battles aren't won just because you refuse to surrender. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to stop losing. Back inside, Linda would probably still be sitting there, the necklace box untouched on the table. Maybe she'd call Scott, maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it no longer mattered. I drove with no destination in mind, the city lights blurring past, and realized that this clarity, was the moment I had been avoiding. The biggest confrontation hadn't been with her, it was with myself. I could keep pretending, keep waiting for her to be the woman I wanted her to be, or I could finally accept that she wasn't, and maybe never had been. Tonight, I chose acceptance, and in that choice, I finally found the kind of peace that doesn't need her permission. The morning after our final confrontation, I woke before the alarm. The apartment was silent, the kind of heavy silence that feels permanent. I lay there for a moment, letting the stillness settle over me, before swinging my legs out of bed. Linda's side was empty, the sheets cold. I found her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she hadn't slept. The necklace box still sat on the coffee table between us, untouched, like a boundary line neither of us could cross anymore. "You're really going," she said without looking up. "Yes." My voice was steady now, stripped of the anger and hesitation that had colored it for months. "I've already started packing." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "I didn't think it would end like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But then, I didn't think you'd give me a reason to leave." She didn't respond, and I didn't push her. There was nothing left to say that could change the shape of what had happened. By noon, I had most of my things in boxes. The essentials went into my car, the rest I'd arranged to have picked up later. Nancy stopped by to help, her presence quiet but grounding. She didn't ask questions, she just taped boxes and stacked them neatly by the door. When we finished, she stepped outside with me. "You sure you don't want me to stay, just in case she—" "I'm sure," I said. "This isn't going to turn into another fight. I've got nothing left to fight about." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You'll be okay, stay. Va. Might take time, but you will." I believed her. The final step wasn't leaving the apartment, it was deciding where I was going. That's where my version of revenge came in. I'd spent months feeling like the powerless one, waiting for Linda's choices to dictate my future. I was done with that. Months ago, before everything came apart, I had been approached with an offer from a design firm overseas. I'd turned it down because Linda didn't want to relocate. Now, with nothing tying me here, I reached out to them again. By the end of the week, I had a contract in my inbox, a position in Milan, with full relocation support and a salary that made my old job look like pocket change. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about thriving somewhere she couldn't reach me, building a life she'd have to watch from afar if she dared to look. That night, I sent my signed acceptance back to the firm and booked my ticket. 2 weeks until departure. Enough time to tie up loose ends and to leave her with something she wouldn't forget. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A mutual acquaintance reached out, asking if I could take over a panel discussion at a local industry event. Scott was slated to be a speaker, and Linda was on the guest list. I agreed without hesitation. On the day of the event, I arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit Linda had once helped me pick out. My presentation was sharp, confident, laced with subtle references to upcoming projects that would take me to Milan. I watched from the stage as she entered the room, trailing behind Scott. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but I didn't acknowledge her. When the QA opened, one of the moderators asked about career transitions. I smiled. Sometimes the best opportunities come when you stop waiting for someone else to validate you. When you realize your time is too valuable to spend on people who take it for granted, you start to see exactly where you're meant to go. I didn't have to look directly at her to know she felt the sting. After the panel, Scott approached me, hand extended. "Didn't know you were speaking." "Guess we've both been busy," I said, shaking his hand without warmth. Linda hung back, her expression unreadable. She didn't approach me, and I didn't offer her the chance. That was the last time I saw them together. In the days that followed, I tied up everything else, sold my car, closed accounts, handed in my apartment keys. Linda didn't try to stop me. There were no midnight calls, no doorstep confrontations. I think she finally understood that the door had closed for good. On my last night in the city, Nancy and I met for dinner. Over a quiet meal, she raised her glass to starting over, and to making sure she knows what she lost. I clinked my glass against hers, to never looking back. The flight to Milan was long, but I didn't sleep. I watched the clouds outside the window, feeling the weight of the past years lift with every mile. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized I wasn't just leaving Linda behind, I was leaving behind the version of myself who had been willing to accept less than he deserved. Landing in Milan felt like stepping into another life. The air smelled different, fresher, like it had been waiting for me. The city moved with a rhythm I instantly wanted to match. Work was intense from the start, but in the best way. My designs were taken seriously, my input mattered. I was building something again, not for her, not to prove anything to anyone, but for myself. A month into my new life, I got a message from an unknown number. The text was short. "I saw your interview, you look happy." No name, but I didn't need one. I stared at it for a moment before deleting it without replying. That was my closure, not in words, but in action. She could watch from a distance, wonder how I was, maybe even regret what she'd done, but she no longer had access to me. That was the real revenge, not screaming, not public humiliation, but living so far beyond her reach that she became irrelevant. One evening, walking back from the office, I passed a jewelry store. In the window was a necklace, nothing like the one I'd bought for Linda. This one was simpler, understated, elegant. I went inside and bought it, not to give away, but to keep as a reminder. Not of her, but of the moment I decided my worth wouldn't be defined by someone else's loyalty. Sometimes, the only way to win is to stop playing the game they keep rigging against you. Months later, I heard from Nancy that Linda and Scott had split. "He's not who she thought he was," Nancy said. I didn't ask for details, I didn't need them. The last time Nancy and I spoke about Linda, she said, "She still talks about you sometimes, says she wishes she'd handled things differently." I smiled faintly. Wishes don't change history. And they never would. Now, when I think of Linda, it's with the kind of detachment you feel when remembering a place you once lived in but could never go back to, not because it burned down, but because you've outgrown it completely. The man who stood outside that church on our anniversary, holding a gift for someone who didn't value him, is gone. In his place is someone who learned that the deepest closure comes not from their apology, but from your own decision to walk away. And in Milan, with the city lights reflecting off the canals and new opportunities opening every day, I finally understood what my mother used to say: the best revenge is a life they can't be part of. I've made sure Linda will never be part of mine again.